A Night with Death. Yo, what's going on? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to today's report. Today's report is coming from an anonymous user of 420chan. When this happened, mid-June of the year 2000. The drugs used were Belladonna, tobacco, and caffeine, at a dose of a few plants. The route of administration, orally. Gender, male. Prior experience includes Benadryl and salvia, and the setting at his non-functioning house in Louisiana. So this report is like a sneak peek of what we got coming up next week. This is definitely one of the most wild, trippy, and dangerous reports we've had yet. This anonymous user and his friends eat a few plants of Belladonna, and to say the least, the experience brings them to hell. I'm sure everyone's gonna like this one, so without further ado, let's dive right into this. It all started around mid-June of 2000. Me and my buddies, Alton, Elmo, and Brandon, were preparing for quite some time to eat some poisonous plant to get a trip. Now, of course, we didn't expect it to be fun. In fact, we pretty much expected to suffer long drawn-out deaths. But we just had to try it, for the sake of getting it under our belts, for the glory, and though we didn't know it yet, for the lulz. So we found our Belladonna patch in full bloom, berries and flowers looking all pretty and such. We decided not to take an experimental amount. We instead had a contest to see who could eat the most. The berries were bitter and burned like a motherfuck. The flowers tasted more like, well, flowers. We had eaten all that we could find. There were only 3 or 4 plants in all. We each said a prayer. To quote Alton, if God didn't want us to do this, he wouldn't have made us so stupid. We headed back to the house, and we all agreed we were pretty buzzed. I can describe the come-on from such a high amount of poison to be a bit like Benadryl, a real spacey and dreamy feeling. By the time we got to the house, we were all nauseous, and the trip began then. 1:35 p.m. Brandon, who had never even smoked pot, probably never even taken aspirin, began to freak out and started dry heaving over the toilet, shoving his fingers down his throat in a desperate attempt to throw up. He tried for what must have been a half hour with no luck. All of us were nauseous, a horrible nausea, a Jean-Paul Sartre kind of nausea, but we couldn't throw up. Brandon gave up his futile attempts to puke, saying, I guess I just have to ride this torpedo straight to hell. At this point, I should mention that I'm writing this right now as I recall it, not saving it to Notepad and proofreading it. This is the first time I've ever spoken about this time. 3 p.m. Still as intensely sick as we were an hour and a half ago, only now the hallucinations are starting to form. None of the other boys can walk, but I'm in the front yard, pacing back and forth, chain smoking. The house didn't have electricity, running water, gas, or anything. It was a house, mind you, a 2-story one at that, but it was abandoned, a perfect place to die. I could hear my friends inside, screaming, cursing, talking, dry heaving, crying, and making bargains with God. I was on my second pack of cigs when I noticed I was covered in cobwebs, thick furry strands of rope kind of cobwebs, and I couldn't shake them off. They were old webs. The spider was surely long gone. I suspect these webs were my cigarette smoke, but I couldn't tell from the state I was in. I smoked my 4th pack of cigs. The butts were covering the ground. It was getting dark. It was winter time. I was hallucinating. I was in Maryland. I decided to head back in. I remember having several lucid daydream type moments, including one where my grandma, the previous owner of the house, told me I was going to die. I didn't care. I couldn't walk anymore. I crawled back in the house. Alton was in a fetal position, screaming incoherently. Brandon was in the bathroom again, also screaming. Elmo was biting his knuckles, and they were bleeding. There were a dozen or so other people in the house, sitting, playing, laugh at the 4 idiots who had poisoned themselves. Some of these people were made of shadow. Some of these people were friends and family. Some were long dead. They were all pointing, laughing and carrying on, like our slow deaths were some goddamn circus act. I fell down. According to Brandon, I was laughing and convulsing at the same time, but at that point, nothing anyone saw could be confirmed as real. 4 a.m., the second day. I woke up thinking I had taken a short nap. From what I gathered, it had been a full day since I had eaten the nightshade. I was sure I was dead. I was moving through the house, but I wasn't sure if I was actually up or not. I was in the kitchen. I was bleeding from my nose, and possibly my eyes, ears, and mouth. My skin was pale as death. I was pretty sure I was no longer of the earth. I heard Brandon. He was behind me, just as pale, bloody around the nose. He asked me if I was dead too. I said, I don't know. Suddenly, I had a lucid moment. I was conscious. The effects of the nightshade had instantaneously worn off. I was aware that I had eaten them and that I wasn't dreaming. I was alive. I shambled into the basement to look at the mirror. Walking was trouble. I was sick. I was weak. In the mirror, I saw myself. I was disgusting, more so than usual. I was not pale, but a sickly yellow. I had pissed my pants, at first thinking it was blood. I was bleeding from not only my nose, but my gums too. In fact, my gums had receded horribly, showing the roots of my teeth, covered in blood, all red. 12 p.m. I was staring at the clock. I don't know what happened after looking in the mirror. I was dead again. Large shapeless brown animals manifested themselves throughout the house. Alton and Elmo were on the floor, twitching, still alive. Brandon was gone. I began searching the house for him, drifting through it. He was nowhere. He was gone. I lied down on the mattress, on the floor, and went to sleep. I dreamed insane dreams, dreams I could only compare to salvia experiences. I didn't know where I was, or if I was. 9 p.m. Alton wakes me up. I'm lucid again. It's him. It's definitely Alton. I ask him, are you just a figment? He replies, you wish. I'm alive. You're alive. Elmo's alive. We survived. I knew it wasn't over. What about Brandon? I say, remembering him asking me if I was dead. We're gonna go look for him. We check the yard. We have flashlights. I remember these conversations so perfectly because no one else talked but the people that were actually there. I was weak from hunger, and my mouth was insanely dry, like sandpaper. I told this to Alton. He gave me a gallon jug of water and asked me if I had pissed in the last 2 days. I felt my wet pants and said, unless that's blood, yeah. They said they had already looked for Brandon and saw him a few times, but it wasn't him. They heard him too, but they couldn't be sure that's what they were hearing. I was still pretty much insane. We all were, but we felt we could function. 10 p.m. We had drank the entire gallon of water, but we were still thirsty. I also had a Red Bull, another cigarette, and a banana, all of which I kept down, amazingly. Then we were back in the woods, looking for Brandon. We'd hear him scream, say hi, hear him walking, but when we looked, we couldn't see anything. We had feared the worst, but the worst was yet to come. 12 a.m. The dead of midnight, the third fucking day of our trip. And yes, we were still very much tripping balls. We were probably plateauing as we walked through the woods. We had been there for 2 hours, walking everywhere, being sliced apart by briars, hearing things, seeing things, drifting off, and coming back. Reflecting on this experience, I was probably not having lucid moments, but simply thinking my hallucinations were really happening. All that has been confirmed in this part of the trip is that Alton and Elmo were with me, Brandon wasn't, and we were in the woods, the dark back of the woods of Louisiana, looking for him, because there's nowhere else he could have gone, and the flashlight was long gone. In fact, it never had been. Neither Alton nor Elmo had packed a flashlight. The water was real. We had 2-gallon jugs with us, and 7 more in the truck, which was back at the house. Although, we would occasionally see it parked in a clearing in the woods, and when we tried to get into it, we would find ourselves sitting on the ground. 1:30 a.m. I had a watch on. I knew the time. I checked it constantly. It was a real solid watch that kept perfect time. I would write the time down on my arm, though I didn't have a pen. Alton and I sat down, in the dark woods, tired as shit, sick as chemo patients, drinking our water. Every once in a while, I would ask him if I was in fact drinking the water. He would confirm it. Then I would ask the question again, and he would have me repeat it. The conversation we had then and there, I can recall perfectly. I remember every word, as does Alton. The only way I can be sure anything happened and wasn't a hallucination is if someone else remembers it too. This is what transpired. Alton: you think Brandon's dead? Me: maybe we're dead, and we can't find Brandon because he's alive. Alton: you're a dick. Me: was Elmo with us? Alton: no, you and me. Me: Blair Witch Project? Alton: essentially. Me: but on drugs. Alton: no drugs. Poisoned. Me: maybe, Alton. I'm not really here. I'm with Brandon and Elmo, dead, back at home, and you're just here, sitting in the woods, alone, waiting to die yourself. Alton: now who's being a dick? Me: I'm just afraid. I'm afraid it's me, sitting in the woods, talking to myself, about to die as well. Alton: this is somehow the most deep and meaningful discussion we've had on this shit. We'll never remember it. It's probably not even happening. At this point in time, we just both stopped talking, stood up, and continued walking, in the dark, through the woods, delirious, disassociated, and dying. 2:33 a.m. I drifted off. Maybe I passed out, whatever. It's hard to tell. But here's the important part of the story, to me at least. In the backwoods of my property, in the middle of redneck, incest, buttfuck nowhere, Louisiana, in our woods, our private hunting grounds, 4 children are buried. They all died of the flu at very young ages. Headstones mark the spot they're buried. I found myself standing on that spot, in front of the headstones, with only the light from my digital watch to tell me this. I read the engravings on the stones, and understood these kids didn't die from the flu. They ate the same plant that I did, for the same nihilistic reason. Their mothers thought they were delirious from fever. They all died within days of each other. Alton was gone, lost, in the woods, yet probably still talking to me. I was standing on the graves of dead children. I shuddered. My granddad called these the sandal graves. I don't know why. 3 a.m. Finally got my skinny ass out of the woods. I was still sick and delirious. My insanity kept coming and going. I kept thinking/hearing Alton, Brandon, and Elmo right next to me. I'd be talking to them, and then they'd be gone. I should add now that it was a full moon, which in the country illuminates everything. I had made it back home. I walked in the house and looked for the others. There was no one there. 3 drugged up weirdos were wandering in the backwoods of Louisiana under the full moon. 5:30 a.m. I waited as long as I could for them to come back. I was on the come down from the plant I had eaten. Every moment I could feel more down to earth. I was still crazy. About every once half hour, I would think I had to get ready for school and would rush around the house looking for clothes. But this would pass, and I'd sit back down and keep waiting for my tripping buddies to come walking out of the woods. It never happened. So I looked in the truck. They had packed potted meat. I hadn't eaten in 3 days, so even this was appealing to me. I popped open the can and ate the horrible shit, and for the first time since eating the poisonous plants, I threw up. 6 a.m. The sun was coming up, and it hurt the fuck out of my eyes. My pupils were about the size of dimes. I was walking down the road to Jackson, bleeding from 24 or so cuts all over my body. I wasn't a sickly yellow anymore. I was white, with black rings around my eyes. I could only imagine what people must have thought as they passed me on the road. Someone in a red pickup truck pulled up beside me and told me he was going to call the paramedics. I asked him, "Why? What's wrong?" He told me I was bleeding. I replied, "No shit. Call the paramedics if I'm dead. Right now, this is none of your goddamn business." He drove off, and I never heard any sirens. 6:45 a.m. Made it to the little convenience store I like to shop at. I bought a thing of sunflower seeds and a Mountain Dew, and managed to have a coherent conversation with the cashier. I tried asking her out, but I think she was put off by the fact that I was half naked and covered in blood. 6:49 a.m. This is the most positive part of this trip. The part where I realized I had survived a lethal dose of poison, and the effects were quickly leaving me. I feel like nothing that happened to me ever in my life could even scare or hurt me, because I had survived this. To this day, I still have that feeling, and that's why I'll never regret this experience. If I hadn't been weak and dying, I probably would have skipped back to my house, but I need to find Alton, Brandon, and Elmo, because it would be a pretty shitty trip if I was the only one to survive. 12 p.m. Alright, here's my favorite part of the trip. I was finally coming down off the poison, and everything was positive. I was still having tripped out thoughts that were nothing but ego boosting, fun, and generally uplifting. I was ubermensch. I could survive any war, any disease, any fight, and anything nature, God, and the universe could throw at me. I had Satan's fire and Christ's light guiding me. I was at home cleaning out my cuts and bandaging them, getting ready to drag my 3 friends' bloody corpses out from the woods. I had eaten some rice, drank about a liter of water, and for some reason had a perfect understanding of the metric system. I wish I had taken a picture of myself then and there, because I was the scariest thing you could have ever seen. I had jet black eyes and alabaster skin. I lied down on the bed to rest my aching muscles. I looked over at my computer, a Pentium with a T1 line, and it was an armadillo, and it said to me in a James Dean's voice, "Kid, you're like the perfect nihilist. You hold no value on your life or anyone else's. You're dying and you don't give a shit. That's wild, man. You poisoned yourself just to see if you would survive, and you did." I stated that my friends were pretty nihilistic as well, as they did the same thing, and the armadillo said, "All they wanted to do was get high, to brag about it. You don't care about bragging. You just went ahead and did it just to do it. You have my respect, kid." 1:30 p.m. I had dozed off. That was obviously a dream. I woke up to hear yelling and screaming and the roar of a diesel engine. I ran outside, and there were my friends, Alton, Elmo, and Brandon, and they all looked like hell. They were all bleeding from one part of their body or the other. They had the same dark circles under their eyes as I did, and were just as pale. But all 3 of them were alive, and as far as I could tell, not a hallucination. I invited them in. 2 p.m. We sat around in my living room. All of us had a bizarre brain fog that made us feel completely dreamlike and unreal. Alton told me that Brandon had gone outside after talking to me, believing himself to be dead. He was under the porch when Alton and I had gone to look for him. As we were having our existential discussion in the woods, Elmo and Brandon had begun looking for us. When they met up with Alton, I was probably at the gravesite at this point. I had gone back to the house while they continued to search the woods for me. It was only luck that they had decided to check my house.